Excellent, thank you.
So our next panel is Measure What Matters. In the theme of impactful diversity and inclusion, oftentimes the metrics part of the conversation can be overlooked. So excited to bring up these group of leaders to discuss what are some of the initiatives that they've implemented within their different organizations. And we have quite a few represented up here today that you'll meet. And also, what are some of the results and KPIs that you've measured to see, how exactly impactful are those initiatives? So that's it. Go.
Awesome. So can you all, am I? Great, okay. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, and we're very excited to be here and discuss metrics. I think that oftentimes, businesses and products that we're all building and launching, we have a lot of different goals, right? We're trying to build the best product out there, attract all the customers possible, retain them, engage them. But we also have missions and we have visions, and we have a lot of different ethical things that we're trying to drive with our products and our companies. And so at times, these can be a little bit at odds. But some of the best companies are able to drive cohesion in these things through essentially selecting the right goals, selecting the right metrics. And really, the intention and the hope is that we're able to explore a lot of those concepts here and share our experiences. And so, by way of introduction, I'd love if we could just go down the line and give a quick introduction for our panelists and discuss a little bit more about, I think, really, why they're excited to be here today.
Awesome. My name is Mihir Nanavati. I'm the head of product for Nextrol. Nextrol is a marketing and advertising data and technology company. We were formerly known as AdRoll before, and we're doing more than ads now, so that's Nextrol. I'm the head of product there, as I said, and I'm really excited to be here as being part of the community to foster discussions around how to build a better product through more inclusive workforce and as part of our values of doing right by the community. It's very important for us to be here and share notes with each other.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I lead the marketing team at Mixpanel, which is inclusive of product marketing, and Mixpanel does both user and product analytics. So I have a young daughter, and she's 4 years old. Last night I watched Super Monsters. I don't know if anyone's seen that Netflix show at all. No one? So when I watched it with her, I said, "Who are your favorite characters on the show?" And she told me Cleo, which is this woman, this young monster who has a little crown. And I said, "Well, is there another one that you like?" She said, "Zoe, because I really like her hair." And so she was like, "I like them because of their crown and their hair." And I was like, "Oh, I wish," she's only 4, so it's okay. But it was like, I wish she just had a little bit more depth in like the heroes that she thought of and the characters. And so what I'm really excited about is really thinking through like, how do we inspire and have leaders in this room and others and beyond to bring product forward. So my daughter and others have just these great aspirational people in the world that she looks up to, these problem solvers. So we see often, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and others, but when you think about women inventors, women leaders, and you have to go much further in history to think about who those are as role models. And so I'm excited for us to build that together.
All right, I'm Alyssa Simpson. I run product management for Figure 8 and Appen. We do training data for the world's most sophisticated AI teams. I'm excited about this because I think when you're building the future of AI, as I'm sure many of you include machine learning in your products and services, we need inclusive teams to do that.
Hi, Denise Hemke. I lead product management and strategy for analytics at Workday. So how many people here are Workday customers? Anybody? Okay, so many of you. So HR and finance is really what we're known for, making businesses really agile by doing all of that in the cloud. But one of the things that I think is really special that I get to do, and I've got one of my leaders over here who actually runs this part of our team, is people analytics. And so it's actually using the power of data to drive change with over 2,000 enterprise companies to have them focus on things like diversity and inclusion and who are we promoting. And so it's a new product actually that we're launching, which I think is just one of the things that I find really exciting because I think about my career and I sometimes joke it was like Denise and the Dudes. That is not a cool band. Yeah. It's just life. And it's nice to actually be able to do good in the enterprise and hopefully move the needle for women.
Awesome. And to just quickly round it out, I'm Phil. It says I'm head of sales up there at Mixpanel, but that's not quite what I am. I am really actually our sales operations, business operations, and business analytics head. And so I'm really excited to be here because I'm kind of a data guy at a data company, and I love numbers and metrics, and especially using them in ways to advance equality. Like, that's why we're here, right? So, to begin with, and let's start talking about how we use those metrics to advance equality. Metrics and numbers can oftentimes be sort of this very wide sea of things. And so choosing the right metrics that matter can be, at times, a bit of a daunting task. And I think it really helps to have a framework or a way to think about these things. And so I'd love if the panel could please give us your experience, let us know a little bit more about how you think about frameworks, how you think about metrics, and how you essentially understand, which metrics you think are probably going to be the right ones that are going to help drive forward your business objectives.
Yeah, I can kick it off. One of the things when we talk about metrics, when we were discussing earlier as well, is to decouple the values part of things from what you're trying to do as a company, the mission. And the way I like to think about this is that the situation is what is important for us as employees of the company. Like, what are the values that matter to us so that we can build good products, which is in parallel to what is important to our customers. How can our product deliver value to our customers? And both are important, and we like to have goals that cover both the values part of the spectrum as well as sort of the actual core mission, which is how does the product help our customers. And so, like, for example, one of the values for us at Nextrol is to foster a work environment that is inclusive for everyone. And we define goals through objectives and key results. I'm suspecting many of you may be familiar with the notion of OKRs. And ours is a goal which says at least 80% of the people respond favorably to the question of, do I belong here, in a survey of inclusiveness. And that's an example of our corporate goal that we use to measure whether or not we are true to our values. And that's different from the product goals, and it's in parallel, where our goal, for example, on one of our business lines is to be a leading account-based platform. And so the way we measure it is, in 2019, we have to launch 5 new products that are non-media products. And that's the way we sort of measure ourselves on each of these dimensions.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that they're the obvious metrics, kind of similar to what we've described here, which is like, how are we driving revenue, right? How are we attributing sales? What are we looking at from a product metrics perspective? But then I think beyond that, it's great sometimes to work for a company that produces HR software, because I don't have to campaign for what's right? We are trying to be, the leader of what is right for organizations. And so I see us doing, some of the same things that they're doing at Nextrol, for example. So employee engagement surveys. How do we, ask somebody 2 questions every Friday, and then use that to drive change in the organization? And so I think that that is really critical, and it's actually a place where, if somebody asks me, hey, what are the best insights you get as a manager, as a leader in your organization? It's from that dashboard. Because it doesn't substitute for the conversation, but it is that early warning sign that there is something going on that I need to dig into and understand with my team. And so I think that that is really critical for me. And then obviously, as I mentioned before, people analytics. How do I, and I can see, like, for me, I've got a team of about 30 product managers. And by the way, shameless plug, we are also hiring. But I know where the hot spots are in my organization. I know where the areas are where diversity is an issue. And I'm not trying to pretend that they don't exist, right? Even as a woman leader, they exist. But I think about other leaders in my organization, people who manage teams of 1,600, my boss who manages a team of 300. How do you understand, as somebody leading that type of organization, where the hot spots are and where the successes are? So that you can, A, find out what's not working, and B, find out who is having success and try to replicate the wins that they're having. So I think it's those type of metrics that will identify, A, how do I dig in with my team and do better? And then also kind of how do I help build an organization for the future? Those are the things in addition to kind of the traditional revenue and product metrics that we really focus on.
And I think it's as these fine folks have said, is doing those quantitative surveys is really, really important. And so we do pulse surveys every quarter at Mixpanel to understand sort of our engagement numbers, our diversity inclusion numbers, and all of those sort of great things. And I think what's also really important is to pair not only the quantitative side of the things, but the qualitative side. So I did a recent one where actually my scores dropped from a team perspective, and I could hone in, as you had said, on these hot spots where there's an individual team where I thought it was actually a really high-performing, well-functioning, very happy team. And the scores came in, and I was like, oh, wow, it's very different than what I thought. And so I individually went to each of the people on the team and said, hey, I just want to understand a little bit more what's happening. Some of the scores weren't as good as expected, and we're here to provide an environment that you can do your best work in. So I just want to understand how we can improve it. And actually the people who I thought would score the best were scoring the worst. And we had very frank and open dialogue about like, what is it that they had expected on the job when they came in? And part of the reason that I thought they would score the best is because some of these people were brand new to the organization. And usually you have this very strong honeymoon period. But it was really the case that that wasn't true. And so by digging in, by really doing these one-on-one interviews, you're able to assess and actually build an action plan to improve things. And I'm happy to say now in this next quarter that teams like scores are much, much, much better.
Awesome. So I think that most companies are slightly different, but in this case, we've seen that there's tends to be oftentimes a case where we're looking at certain metrics for the company, performance overall, and then oftentimes we need to have specific metrics at the table which really call to mind these other activities which are important to us as well. That we have a metric that indicates improvement in, say, recruiting or improvement in current status quo at the company as well. And the truth is it's not enough to just have these metrics. That we also need to implement these metrics and make sure that they are things that we ascribe to and that they are things that are permeated and exist across the organization. And so I'm hoping that our panelists can now share a little bit more about, not just sort of selecting the metrics and understanding them, but also putting them into action. And I think Jessica began with a good introduction of that, right? Going into each team member, understanding the root cause of what's happening. But let's see if we can dig a little bit more into just, taking the numbers, making them really sing and drive change throughout our organizations.
I think one thing that I think a lot about is, like, of course, everyone wants to build diverse teams. Like, that's all good. Everyone agrees, right? Like, we're all on the same page. But it doesn't always happen, right? We're still sort of stagnant, and there isn't a lot of progress made. And sort of why is that? We're pouring money into this, and like the needle doesn't move that much. One of the things that I've seen be really successful, and this was not where I am now. I'm at Figure 8. Back when I was at IBM, is actually managers' bonuses are attached to having diverse teams, right? So you can make it an explicit business outcome to create a diverse team. And and this is at a pretty sort of high org level, so not at like an individual, managing a 5-person team, a first-line manager. And you can't really tokenize when you're managing 500 people, right? Or 1,000 people or 5,000 people. In a large organization, you really need to create a culture of belonging and some of the other, where people feel comfortable, and some of the other things I've talked about here. But when you can attach what is sometimes considered a second-tier problem, or, this is like an HR thing, HR team should focus on this. It's like, no, this is like a business problem. Because if you're businesses with diverse teams outperform businesses that aren't diverse, right? And so if you can hold your team accountable to it in the same way you hold your team accountable to top line revenue metrics, it starts to sort of change the culture. And at least when I was at IBM, it's one of the most diverse sort of large organizations that I've ever been at.
That's great. And the other thing I would just add to this is a lot of it is about breaking down sort of the problem. So if your goal is to drive diversity and inclusion, is it a sort of top of the funnel problem, which is like you're not getting enough candidates in who are diverse and inclusive? Or is it sort of like a more, as you go further down in the recruiting funnel, like you're not closing them or they're not just interested in joining? So where sort of is the problem? At Mixpanel, I'm really proud to say that we actually use a company called TripleByte, and about 20% of our engineering workforce is hired through that, which actually takes a look at people and doesn't say like, okay, at Mixpanel we have a very high standard for our engineers, so we recruit heavily from, people who have really strong college resumes, but also from Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google. And so with TripleByte, you can actually take an engineering test, and then from that program, we've hired some amazing people who, on first glance at their resume, those are people we would never really normally hire, right? They went to community college, and most tier 1 tech companies would probably not look at them. And so that's a good way to bring more people into the funnel. And some of those people are, like our leading technical teams for us, or one of the most senior engineers on some of our hardest problems like infrastructure engineering. And so that's a good way to think about it. The other thing that we've started to look to is as we analyze the numbers, we also start to see, are there ways that we could think about how do we close candidates who are more on the diversity inclusive side, or maybe we're not as good at that, where maybe we need to have more women on panels, as an example, to show people that we care about that. In addition to that, so they can see other people who are like them. And so those types of things, like when you think about it, you just need to assess the problem a little bit more and then look to see how you can solve it.
I think continuing on the theme of a funnel, one of the things that we also do is try to put concrete, measurable goals right up to even for me in terms of what we desire to have. And of course, we're also recruiting. So my goal personally in this quarter is to have at least 50% of the candidates at the top of the pipeline that are women in product. And then we also go through each level. And often I harass our HR colleagues where we're like, where are we in each stage of the funnel? And they're like, Mihir, do you really need to go through this on your own? It's like, yes, I have to, because I need to model this for the rest of the team, and we need to have the same goals for the entire organization. And I need to, demonstrate that this is important to me so that everybody also understands that the rest of the company can follow through on these areas. We have, 50% of our team is women, but that's not good enough, and we want to do more. And so we have to track all the way from the top through the interview process of the funnel to see how can we do better.
That's great. I think it really does speak to, absolutely, there's a gold star right there. And it definitely does speak to your commitment, right? And I think that this is something that, I'm not sure if it's something you instilled at Next Role or if it's something that was there pre-existing, but I think it's certainly something that is a testament. I think that there's going to be many situations, though, where we're entering into a workforce and maybe that culture doesn't already exist. And so there's an element of us understanding, okay, we have these goals. We want to ensure 50% of our workforce is women. We want to ensure XYZ things. So we set these goals. We've taken some actions against them, right? We're using diverse sourcing agencies, or we've identified that part of the issue is the top of the funnel. But things don't always go perfectly. So if we are in a situation where maybe it's an adverse environment that's not fully accepting already, or other things, I'm curious your experience, your thoughts around really developing and building out those environments, or, more generally speaking to the adversity you might see in being a proponent and champion of these goals and metrics.
I think there's two ways to solve problems. There's either the top-down approach or the bottoms-up approach. And I think generally, top-down approach, while at first glance seems like it's usually very good and something that will work, and I applaud your efforts to go meticulously through stuff, I think actually the best programs that work are actually bottoms up, where actually the people at the ground level are really passionate about these things. And so at Mixpanel, we have a lot of these employee resource groups that have started themselves because people really cared about women at Mixpanel, or they cared about mixability, people with specialized conditions, or Black Panel. And they formed these groups because they wanted to build an environment that was more inclusive. And I think a lot of times those types of environments work the best, where it's not someone, from a business perspective, like I can go tell the team to go hit X goal or do X campaign, but at the end of the day, if they're not bought into it, it just doesn't work as well. They're not as passionate about that. They just don't give it their 100%. And so when diversity and inclusion is not just a tops-down driven approach, but something that is done bottoms up as well, I think you tend to just get much, much better results.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to that, because we were talking a little bit about this before. Your company's a lot smaller. We're obviously from a bigger company, or I'm from a bigger company. And so I think And I think we have similar programs which I think are great and valuable, but I think it's also about, sometimes also giving a place for executives and for leaders to kind of plug in and figure out how can they support other teams better. So I kind of mentioned the hotspots, right? Looking at those metrics. So we have a team that's purely focused on people analytics, not to be confused with the product, really a team of data scientists and analysts that are looking at things like, hey, how do we take that engagement survey and actually even start to create a belonging index, right? How do we take that further and say, do people of different genders, do people of different races feel like they belong? Is their sentiment different? And I think that, and again, kind of using that in conjunction with your leaders, they can start to say, okay, where there are issues in the organization where we see that this is deviating kind of from what's normal or what we desire as an organization, it does give you a good chance to hook in, to say what's happening here, what's not happening here that we see happening elsewhere. So I'll tout, maybe my boss's success as an anecdote. So one of the stories that we showed, and that's kind of these insights that we surface, is that he had moved the needle very significantly in terms of female diversity. Now, I'd like to say that it was my team, but it was actually the engineering team because we kind of run under a GM model. And so the people analytics team contacted the HR business partner because we hadn't rolled this product out yet. And so we were still kind of in this early adopter phase and said, what are they doing over there? Like, what's going on? Because whatever you guys are doing is right. And we don't see maybe some of those same wins happening elsewhere. And so she rattled off all these things, right? We're doing unbiased interview training. We're, making sure that we're doing URM kind of focused recruiting events. We're sitting down with engineers and going through their LinkedIn profiles with them to say who are the women that you know that are qualified and really encouraging them to bring in those people in their network. And it's that active outreach and kind of giving people the place to hook in to understand what's working and then try to figure out how you can replicate those successes, I think is also really critical.
I think another angle that we haven't touched on yet is around, it's not just getting people in the door, it's also keeping them there, right? And promoting them up. And I think motherhood is like a big part of this, right? And we don't talk a lot about it openly. So I'll just share sort of my own experience with it. So a year ago, I took over a team, I was managing, it was sort of a turnaround situation. I was trying to sort of I needed to exit some people and hire some other folks. And one of the women who was before me was my first one-on-one with her. I sat down and she was like, actually, I'm pregnant. And I was like, okay, good to know. Like, awesome. I was not a mother at the time. And so I was like, all right, I want to like be a really great supporter. Like, how do I, champion her and like make a good experience and do the right thing while at a startup, while having, goals to achieve and all the above. And so she went on maternity leave. We, sort of made sure she had a great place to come back to. And I was really clear that like, okay, you can work from home or you can work remote. And I was like sort of trying to do all the right things. And even so, about 6 or 8 months after she came back from leave, she ended up leaving the company and deciding that commuting was just like too hard for her. And actually she decided to take a bunch of time off. And I was like, oh, like there was something that was like, I just felt like a failure because, and on the flip side, as her friend, like that was the right thing for her to do, right? And that was what she wanted to do, and I was really proud of her for deciding to not work, and she's traveling all over the world, having these great experiences that I'm jealous of because I follow her on Instagram. And then I got pregnant and had my first child, and I was sort of like determined to come, and in the middle of that, my company got acquired as well, and so I was like, all right, how do I like make sure that this bigger job, which has been promised to me, like becomes my job, and I sort of got focused on that. And then another woman on my team is pregnant now, and I'm like sort of making sure that I sort of don't make any of the same mistakes now that I've sort of had my own experience with it. But I think as managers, as well as individuals, asking for what you need from your boss is really important. Asking for things, and because often they can be given to you. So there's another mother on my team, and she wants to take time off for a month to go to India with her family and, spend, and she's like, assumed that she couldn't take a month off. And I was like, no, you can take a month off. Like, we'll figure out how to do that. We'll cover for you, whatever. And the look on her face was like, oh, like she thought she had to quit. And I think it goes in both directions, both as a manager as well as individual contributors, asking for what you need and telling your team that they can ask for what they need.
Awesome. So I think, that runs the gamut of sort of thinking about metrics, what is our sort of frameworks. Oftentimes we do want to have very specific metrics for our different goals. And a lot of the support for this will come from the top, might come from the bottom. And sometimes you need the perfect fertile ground for these sorts of things to grow. I think we might have time for one more question around the panel. And so I'd just be curious, for everyone out here, if you have, actually, this is just somewhat a softball. Actually, it could be kind of hard. Of your experiences, is there one in particular where you think it sort of demonstrates just really what it takes to drive change with metrics? I mean, I have to say metrics, right, because that's kind of the panel, but I kind of actually just want to learn more about your experiences. And so if you had some parting words of advice, or experiences you'd like to share with everybody here, I'd love to just end with that.
I can share one. So I take my employee engagement data and I actually show it in my team meeting, like really transparently, almost and I actually will turn it into a heat map. Not all the scores are great, right? Like some of them, I think right now I've got like 3 that I would say are Ds, right? And of course, I've got A's, things that I'm really proud of, but there are 3 that I'm not proud of. And so I would encourage, I think, and somebody mentioned it earlier about kind of sharing, right, of making the open API, almost when it comes to your data and the way that you will instill change is being very transparent with your team on the data. Because that is the only way that A, they know you care and that you really want to move the needle and that you're going to get that feedback back. And so I think it's only through that transparency and then actually actioning what they say that you will move the needle. And so I think sometimes people don't want to show their bad scores. I would say be open, show them. That's the only way they get better.
Ditto.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, I feel like as leaders, you oftentimes want to hide the things that are bad. And so I've felt that before where I'm very shameful. And even actually some of my team is in the audience today, and we went through our engagement pulse survey results just actually today in an all hands meeting. And it was one of those moments where you see the red and you're dip your head and you're like, oh my God, I'm a terrible leader. And this is why the scores are terrible. And what can I go do to change it around? But I think if you don't honestly have those very open dialogues and have the room challenge you, throw away any part of ego that you have and very much think about an environment that's safe and trustworthy, be vulnerable. And when you're able to be vulnerable, you get to much better solutions. You're actually able to talk really realistically about the fact that maybe your team is overworked. Maybe they have too many priorities on their list and you're not helping them prioritize enough. And getting to the root cause of those things are the only way that you can go change those metrics. So I think a lot of times it's really hard to hear that hard feedback, but there's no way that anything's going to get better unless you actually have the dialogue. And I think that's so crucial to go do.
Yeah, everything these guys said, I would say it's the same thing for us as well. The one other thing I would add is that it's also about engaging and having a dialogue with the team itself to also try to understand the root cause and figure out joint solutions or action plans from there. In our case as well, we had situations on the employee engagement survey where, for example, the faith in the product itself was the lowest in the product team. The product team scored the lowest in the entire company. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. So we, in our team meeting, we had a whole hour dedicated to sharing that data set and had a dialogue about why do we ourselves have very little faith in what we are doing. And only after we had a conversation about it, then we took some action plans and said, this is about resourcing, this is not about faith. And we unpacked the problem much deeper when we were able to set the time and transparently show the numbers and have a dialogue about it and come up with joint plans.
Excellent. And so with that, I think we're through, and I'd really like to thank our panelists. Thank you, Denise, Alyssa, Jessica, Mihir, for sharing your experiences and sharing your vulnerability, if you will. So thanks again.